It is my pleasure to welcome here today Professor Stekeler. He's, as you may know, he's currently visiting professor here at our department, but otherwise he holds professorship at the University of Leipzig. He focuses in his research on philosophy of language and logic, especially focus on connecting classical philosophers with current topics in analytic philosophy, for example Hegel, and today's talk will be from this point of view as well. I like also that the talk will, in some general sense, focus on a similar topic than the previous one of Mark Lisior. We will discuss the relation between I and you.
So, thank you very much for the invitation to Bratislava and to this series of talk. So the thanks go to Lazzo and to Jarda and to Matej and to all of you. Normally such a talk starts with an apology, so I have to apologize that it's not so much about Hegel and it's not at all about logic. So, but it is, in another sense, a Hegelian way of looking at the notion of we and us, and it's logical in a wider sense. It's not logic in the narrow sense of calculus, but it's trying to show that logical analysis of language and logical analysis of practice forms are more or less the same, at least if you look from a very abstract point of view. So in fact, it's a similar topic as last time, but much more abstract and with another focus, because I'm not interested in, at least today, not interested in the question of early development, ontogenesis of joint attention, joint intention, and things like that, especially not in the Bradmanian approach, but rather in something, I think the task of philosophy is to articulate forms which seem to be hidden, or at least implicitly hidden in practices, and I just want to present kind of looking at things which might have immediate and surprising results. So that is what I want to do, and because I don't read but talk about the subject matter, sometimes there might be some sentences missing. Just ask later what I have left out. So, but that's still an introduction, and that shows what it has to do with Hegel. Hegel has a gnomic oracle in the phenomenology. The I is a we and the we is an I. And at first I focus on the first part. The I is the we, and I would comment on that in the following way. I would say the notion of a personal subject has to be explained. A subject is somebody who performs things. Personal is somebody who can perform things in a certain way, and being persons means being part of a community already, which is not a really canonized way of talking, but it should be canonized, because then, of course, we do not count persons as bodies as we do in elevators, which is only a kind way of talking about individuals. So, in a certain sense, my canonical reading would be subjects are performative animals and men. So animals are subjects, but no animal is a person, because there is not the same social connectedness between animals as men. Personal competences means to play a role in human games, and language, for example, is one of these human games. So talking about persons in a canonical way is talking about personal subjects generally. Explicit divisions of labor by contractual promises would be a special case for social connectedness, and it's a pity that the traditional access to the notion of person and the notion of society and societal things is Hobbesian. It's Hobbes. It's the methodological individualism, whereas the other perspective is being a person presupposes the society. And that means talking a language presupposes the existence of language, and language is an institution, and it exists not in the individuals, but in the individuals and the institutions of practices. So we have to have a holistic view, or we don't understand what's going on. Which shows that even in psychology, at least in a higher level psychology, we should understand it as microsociology and not just as physiology or as a higher physiology as it is done today. On the other hand, methodological individualism is right to stress that we actualize joint intentions only via corresponding instantiations. That means, of course, institutions would not exist if there were no people to play it. Any B group and joint action consists of what its member really say and do. That is true. But the forms exist before the personal subjects. And this is overlooked by methodological individualism, and therefore Hegel attacks Hume's actualism fiercely. And I think he's totally right. But this still prevails until today, because we have methodological individualism and naturalism as the today's superstition, not only in ideology but also in the social sciences altogether. So only in performing our parts we form a plural subject. We form a plural subject by taking part in a plural action. The joint results of what each of us does is what we do. And the generic we turns into the generic I. Now that is just turning the second part of this famous gnomic oracle of Hegel. The we is an I, where he just says critically, but I think a good interpreter will see it immediately, that the we, in a certain sense, must be reduced to what the singular persons and the individuals are doing. So that is just the acknowledging the primacy of the individual actors. So we have both sides here in this famous saying. By the way, at the place in the phenomenology, this is just the promise what Hegel will later do in the rest of the phenomenology spirit. That's at least my proposal how to read that stuff. But you will see I will not talk much about Hegel here. So, philosophy and the social sciences is one of the content I want to talk about, but I almost said everything which was to be said about it. The social sciences, especially psychology, should be understood not only as a behavioral, but as a joint action analysis, and therefore, for me at least, psychology as microsociology is still not really in place, so there would need a development. And then I talk about the difference between collective action, coordination of behavior, and cooperative actions. And in the end, there will be some results even to the ethical approach of Kant, that is the fifth, the moral duty, and the problem of trust and its limit. So, an investigation of the practical forms of joint action and the general structure of sociality, which we can or should label personhood, turns in the end into a logic of the words us and we together with I and you. And in my opinion, most approaches do not really take the logical part of that analysis really seriously enough. Now, logical in that very general sense. For example, when it comes to the analysis of the notion of I, Peter Strawson and others think that the I refers to the body, and they overlook that the I refers to the person, which is a role and much more abstract than the body. And therefore, the analysis of the I in the philosophy of the first person is one-sided, even in Anne's camp, though she is very good in that already. So, the word I does not name the body. The word we does not name a set of persons, because talking about a set of persons and using the word we is different. Talking about a set is talking from the side, using the word we is performative in action, and the performations of actions are totally different than talking about a set with members. This is a logical remark, and therefore, but I think the logical remark refers to what the difference of doings. Rather, such words are used to express anaphoric relations, to say me as a real speaker or us as a we group of persons engaged in a certain form of cooperation. Therefore, a we group is something else than a we set, because a set is talked about from the side. A we group can be expressed only if somebody of us talks for us. And the amazing thing is, by the way, that the standard use of we is just the standard representation, like a representation of the state. Chancellor, a prime minister talks for the state and says we. Only in churches we sing together, we, that everybody says we. Normally somebody says for us. And that's a trivial but very important observation. That means only in a church-like liturgy we all sing we. Else somebody, I for example, speak for us. And that is an absolutely crucial structure, that individuals say we and not we groups say we. They very rarely say we. Even if somebody writes in the Constitution, we, the people of the United States, it was written by Jefferson or whoever, but it was a person, a singular person, not a small group of persons, but not we, the people of the United States. This usage of the word we, when we now do not talk who is speaking, but when we talk about the content of a we sentence, can be distributive or joint. So a distributive reading of we went for a walk together, we went for a walk yesterday, could be I went to the city and you went to the woods. That would be distributive. But non-distributive would be, that is Margaret Gilbert's observation, we went for a walk together, and if the distance between the two or three or whoever it is we were too far away, if the man was walking seven meters ahead or whatever, then they didn't do it together, then it was still distributive. So it's interesting that the joint we, the semantics of a joint we, needs additional conditions of how the actors relate to each other than a distributive one. Therefore, the distributive we is much more easier to understand than the joint, the logic of the joint we. And this observation of Margaret Gilbert is a rock bottom observation we have to take into account in any case. Everybody does that. To Amanda, Sir Bradman, everybody does that, and that's fine. But it's by far not enough. Then I have another distinction, not only the distributive and non-distributive or joint, we also need a distinction between open and closed we. The closed we would be, for example, me and my wife, I say to my wife, we went for a walk together. That would be closed because the set is just clear, the two people. But my example, we, the people of the United States, is an open use. Whoever will join that people will be part of that people. So we have a closed use, which more or less is similar to a closed set, so to a defined set. And the open V, and the open V is much more often and much more important. That means that more or less everybody is invited to take part in that V group if he just fulfills some conditions. And this V is interesting, the open V. An open V can be nevertheless an institution, because an institution can be fixed, but it could be, the persons can be replaced, or it doesn't matter who plays which roles, and that can be an open institution. A closed institution would be an institution with fixed personnel, which is a rare case, by the way. So the basic idea how to read words like we, us, and our in all four cases, distributive and non-distributive, open and closed, is making them dependent on the predicates used. My proposal is, if we look at the predicates, the whole mystifying we in the writings, even of Searle, even of Bradman, disappears. We just have to look more closer to the real usage, and then we see that the mystification of the joint action, the we in joint action, disappears. So it is the verb phrases that express the relevant joint actions, the properties or practices. However, it is also important for determining the we group corresponding to a sentence of the form we do X or we are X to answer the following questions, and that's clear. Who utters it? Because somebody must belong to it. The speaker should belong to the we group, just as I do when I say we in an object-level mood. Who would accept what is said as correct and proper? That's also important here. In such a way that he or she might either say, I want to do you that thing too, or I also have the property Y in the distributive case, or I take part in X in the non-distributive case. Next question, who would count himself as belonging to us? So a we group is open, but it's open because whoever wants to join may join it. When we have, for example, when we write we in a polite form, everybody does it sometimes, because else you would have to write too often I or one says, therefore we use the word we. And then some people read it and say, but that means that he wants me to get in, but most often it's only proposed you can get in if you want, and if you don't, I don't care. But the we is not a plural because the we is just a proposal, it's just a kind of, you may take sides with it. And then, of course, these traditional criticizing of somebody who writes we would be wrong if we read it in the right way. And who would count himself as belonging to us, of course, and whom would we count? I cannot go into all the details, but it's interesting that they all have to be taken into account. That means it would be wrong not to think about these different moments of the use of the we. So the fact that the we group often is not defined by distributive properties leads us to say, with Margaret Gilbert, that the we group is a plural subject of a shared intention and of a joint action or practice. In my opinion, there is no mystery about such plural subjects if we just look at the grammar as I described. There is no plural subject beyond what I have said to the we in the sense of the possibly open and possibly distributive reading. So it's only a plural subject in a grammatical sense, but not in another sense. And this is, I think, a way we should at least try to follow as a strategy in the analysis of the we and the us. The peculiarity of joint intention consists in the respective content of the we intention, not in the we itself. Each of us may have the intention to take part in the joint action H, It's H because in German, Handlung, you know, but, and A is not a good variable. The joint action H is defined by what each of us is expected to do in case we really take part, and therefore H can split up into sub-tasks, and that is exactly where I want to dwell on, and what will be interesting when we look in more details. Reinhold Thurmer speaks of group action and intentional group actions, and I think these are harmless if we just read them as titles. They are just sideway-on titles for the usage of we, and there's no mystifying group actions, and especially not in the third case. John Searle speaks about we intentions in the head of the individual actors, and he writes that even in the picture into the head. What Searle means seems to be this: each participant of a we group has the corresponding we intention. Unfortunately, Searle doesn't tell us enough about what precisely is in the head, or what is represented in the mind of the individual people involved if they say or think we do X or we should do X. So especially the difference I want to dwell on later is not made clear in Searle, because it's something else to say we should keep the CO2 emission low. That's nice to agree. But when we go into more details, it doesn't follow yet what I and you and everybody has to do, which is a very important difference between a joint acceptance of a statement in the general, in the generic way, and in the more precise way when we really want to do something. So the principle we intention, the generic we intention and the specific we intention are fairly different. And my claim is that not seeing this difference is one of the attack of Hegel against Kant. And Hegel uses, as we will see, the word an sich, which is a dangerous word in German, because Kant misuses it, by the way. It's no German and no English and no Latin how he uses an sich. This is a Kantian use. And Hegel makes clear that kat auto and per se is just a phrase which turns something into a generic element. That means into a type and not into a token. And therefore, it just has the same meaning as in principle. So if we want to do something an sich or in principle, we do not want it yet in an und für sich. That means in itself and for us in the sense of individual tasks. And therefore, we have to be much more precise in asking what is the content of a we intention. So, but when it comes to collective action, and the important differentiation seems to me, and that's already also already in the literature. David Lewis, in his book Conventions, which is a very good book and a very important book, has made these things clear. A collective action results from each individual in a set of people. But the result, the joint result, can happen by chance. But it might also follow from conventions that coordinate individual behavior or action, or from forms of free cooperation. It's interesting if you read the book it's an old book, it's from '69 or so. It's interesting that because David Lewis can deal very well and very nicely, because in game theory one can deal very nicely with conventions, what he called conventions. But it's very difficult to deal with free cooperation. Therefore, David Lewis wants to reduce all joint actions more or less to conventions, that means to the easy case. This is a strategy like looking for a lost key where the light is. And I think that's not the good method, because sometimes the key is lost in the dark. Therefore, we will have to talk more about free corporations than conventions, but I just want to say what's the difference. In an evaluation of the coordinating scheme, each of us gets maximum gains. So, for example, the example is we introduce a scheme of walking and driving on the right, on the continent or on the left in Great Britain. And this convention is very helpful. For example, the traffic gets much smoother, and if you walk, it's much easier to walk. In China, for example, when sometimes I was walking on the Great Wall, and because they do not have that rule, if they come to these places where there are doors in some of these buildings on the wall, because the Chinese, they walk on both sides, and then they walk to each other and you don't get through. So I was in a hurry and I just barely missed the bus, because it was just impossible to walk fast because there is no rule to walk on the right side. And therefore, David Lewis is totally right. If you have introduced a conventional rule like that, everybody knows that he will has the advantages of it, so there is no high risk that people do not use it, if it's already installed, of course. Therefore, conventional solution of cooperation problems are very stable, because they, keeping to them is in the interest of each individual. And just because of that feature, David Lewis, of course, was very fond of these conventional solutions of cooperative problems, and of course that's a nice way, but he's overdoing it and saying that human beings can only solve that way, and I think that is wrong. There is another problem in David Lewis. Unfortunately, David Lewis wants to explain the emergence of linguistic meanings on the ground of conventions. Such an approach is circular. It presupposes already complex linguistic representations of intentions and contentions. Rice's intentionalism is circular in the same way, and the problems we should have with Bradman, especially when it's used on the very low level, as we have heard it last week, is very problematic also. So just because in Bradman's and David Lewis' case, I have to figure out what's in your head and you have, and what you think, what is in my head, and things like that. This is a way of dealing with these things which is too complicated and not really realistic. And nevertheless, it's a wrong approach, because we never do mind reading, in my opinion. What we do is we talk about joint actions and how to separate and how to divide labor, and we do that not like we do that here on the table and not by mind reading. So therefore, the whole approach seems to me, and I totally agree with Mark in that respect, totally, too complicated and non-realistic. But we have a very old, and that's not a new idea, we have a very old knowledge about the problems of reactions, which, if they are free cooperative, if they are moral free cooperations. And I think the earliest real interesting approach to that is Plato in his Republic. Because he thinks in the Republic already about the basic forms of free cooperation, as I call it. Free cooperation is of a form that the cooperative actions, and that they are cooperative, are not, at least not always, in that form, or do not have the form of a merely conventional solution of joint behavior, where it's immediately clear that the highest gain the individuals I have coincides with the joint gains separated in the free cooperation. So in free cooperation there is the risk of trust, or there is the risk of free riders, or there is the risk of a homo economicus who is just abusing the others. And therefore the real problem of free cooperation is discussed in game theory, but game theory invents a new notion of rationality, which coincides with David Lewis saying rational action here is defection out of free cooperation. The only possibility of cooperating is by conventions. Therefore, by the way, they need the state in order to force us to write on the right-hand side, or to do something else, because to change the matrix of merits, because they do not believe that humans are able to freely cooperate. That means not to fall into the tricks of the prisoner's dilemma. I will take a little bit more about that later. So for them, and that's not Hegel, by the way, for them the state is needed because else people would not cooperate. They are legalists in a certain sense. But Plato already brings that famous example of Gyges, as I would like to pronounce him in Old Greek. Gyges is that person who has more or less is able to make himself invisible, and therefore he can kill the king and nobody knows who he was, and he marries his wife, and everything what he does, he will never be caught because he has that possibility of making himself invisible. So Gyges is a bad person. His privation consists in acting as a homo economicus, as a merely intelligent animal. Hegel is ridiculing persons like that and calls them, they belong to a geistiges Tierreich. So they are animals which use all the language and all the faculties we have as persons only instrumentally. So they are free riders on human culture. That is the definition of geistiges Tierreich in Hegel, and the same says Plato about Gyges. So a mere homo economicus is a free rider, because he uses all the results of free corporations only for his own benefit. And he thinks even that he is especially clever and rational if he does so. And Plato, of course, he is great in saying, well, there is a big problem, because from the perspective of Gyges, or from the perspective of Thrasymachos, or from the perspective of the sophists, it's really difficult to convince people that Gyges is a deficient person, not a good person, a bad person. And because it sounds as if he is rational and good. So Plato is fair to say it's a real problem, just as the prisoner's dilemma shows that there is a real problem in free cooperation. And insofar, it's not the old, it's not a new invention. The only way in game theory is the way how they express these facts, but the knowledge of the facts is as old as Plato. So my claim is that Gyges and the examples Plato gives already discuss the prisoner's dilemma. They discuss it only in other terms. So cooperative actions are actualizations of cooperative action types, schemes, or what is the same, of generic forms of cooperative actions. In a certain sense, what I say here these are not claims, they are just proposals for developing the commentary language, and that's exactly what we need. Such a cooperative action type is an abstract division of individual generic actions and typical tasks. I include tacitly a division of merits and gains, if there is one, because else I would things get too complicated. So in the action types, the merits and gains should be already included, because else the representation gets too complicated. And if that is, if we are allowed to do so, then a formal expression for a joint action has just this form. The problem is that J is open. It's unclear who is J, who is the group of the big J. And it's only splitting up the tasks and roles without saying yet who is who. And therefore we have a general joint action is described by leaving open who will take part and leaving open who has to take which task. And that is a joint action. It's describing, for example, walking together would mean we don't know how many, but they should stay together somehow. And that is the only condition on what they're doing. Or playing in a symphony says not clear who is playing which instrument, but they should somehow harmonize. And we will see how that continues. Michael Bradley talks of procedures. That is already too fast, because procedures would already define these tasks to the two lowest level. So we must distinguish between the very general level and separating them to individual procedures attached to the individual persons. So therefore we have to distinguish between a system of procedures in the abstract as a merely possible way to arrive at a cooperative action age, and as a concrete division of labor in which the persons PJ are already named. I know who is playing the violin, I know who is playing the flute, and so on, who do or have to do their part. We may think of doing some work together or playing games with different players, of singing in choirs, performing symphonies with different or with fixed persons. Symphonies are not by chance good examples. Especially because we need a conductor if the group of people gets too large and the task too complicated. An institution now, and that is also only an explanation of the commentary language, is a system of practices. So it's a complex system of roles and partial actions. In the institution of jurisprudence, for example, there are roles of judges and lawyers, of state attorneys and defendants, and they then separate into procedures. For each of them, there is a whole system of sequences of possible cooperative actions, more or less prefixed. In a mathematical shorthand, we could use these indices in order to say institutions consist of systems of practices, and the system for practices can be described in general, and then we look for the concrete division of labors. And that is the cascade from the general to the concrete. A formal institution, as well as an informal practice, thus consists of whole families of cooperative actions. Sometimes we use the word justice for the formal institution of jurisprudence. Sometimes the word justice is a title for the informal practice of moral judgment, made explicit by a system of moral principles. And that shows that even these words have different meanings. We have to look what they talk about. We appeal to these informal notions of moral justice when we criticize a positive and explicit legal system with as a fixed institution. So we have these two levels. Legalism would be the claim that there cannot be justice outside a positive system of legal rules which would mean that only the positively installed institution exists, but not the general debate about its form, which of course is not true in a certain sense. It rests on some deep misunderstanding of the relation between informal practices and formal institutions. And insofar, these very easy explications of that linguistic analysis show us already how one can use it for criticizing wrong and very widespread superstition or misjudgments. So abstract descriptions of joint actions, practices, or institutions make it possible to judge about a form of cooperation without knowing already who of us will play which roles in the end. This is very important because then we can judge practice from the side without already talking about where we are inside in the group. In a certain sense, this is important because this is just the possibility of judging a practice as such in sich, independently of I profit from the if I belong to the people well-to-do, I profit from the division of labor in Germany or in the Czech Republic because as academics we are well paid. And nevertheless, we can talk about the whole practice and say, well, from a certain point of view, it's unfair, or it's fair, or and so on and so on. By the way, this mystifying wheel of ignorance, which was introduced by the ethical considerations of John Rawls, is nothing else than, now we can understand what he is doing, it's nothing else than talking about a practice as such, an sich, independently of the place we are in. So, therefore, we have to evaluate practices and institutions an sich. Nevertheless, we know it's not enough, it's not good enough. And as such, we evaluate types of forms of practices. And here I have it, John Rawls in the theory of justice proposes it. The wheel of ignorance in effect means that we should generically judge about a practice as such, not just about its reality for itself, which is the complete instantiation of who plays which roles, and merely actual empirical appearances. So that's the whole book has only this idea in it, and that's it. But this idea is important, there is nothing wrong with it. By the way, John Rawls thinks that this is a Kantian idea, but he doesn't see that Kant's moral principles hold only for more or less dual actions. He doesn't really talk about institutions, at least not in the critique of practical reason. We will come to that later. So when we talk about the concrete cooperative actions and practices under the wheel of ignorance, we talk about it as if there were a possibility of a new social contract. That means that we could shift the roles between the persons, which normally is not possible. This way of talking is important in order to articulate the difference between an acceptance of the scheme in its abstract form and in its concrete realization. So we have to evaluate two things, not only one thing. We have to evaluate, and we have to evaluate from different perspectives. Not only from the perspective of taking part, but also from outside. So, it is clear, you know, justice as fairness is more or less the idea of Rawls. It is clear from the outset why a fair division of tasks and merits is in general case better than an unfair or non-proportional distribution of labor and benefits. A fair or equal, proportional, equal distribution of labor, tasks, and benefits, results, is easier, better, and fairer just because it comes nearer to the Lewisian idea that everybody wants to do it. Because in a fair division of labor, nobody feels that he's at the wrong place. It's just like the David Lewisian way. So when we discuss a plan for joint actions before putting it into praxis, a fair division of tasks and merits obviously is a precondition for a general and unconditioned acceptance of the proposed scheme of joint action. Without it, the cooperation or social contract most probably will never leave the stage of an abstract plan, the level of an action type merely as such. This holds for a newly proposed joint practice. So if we come together and say, let us do that, and together, and if the proposal would not be fair, some of you would not take part, and the whole project would disappear. So unfairness in our institutions, in the historical institutions, stem from the fact that the historical institutions are not the result of free deliberation of how to do things, because they come from another historical fixed division of labor and division of benefits. And insofar, the example of a fair distribution works for a Hobbes case where we really make contracts. There it works. But for historically developing institutions, it doesn't work. At least not without an appeal, you should make it fairer. Because there is not, for the people having the better places in the institutions, there is no incentive to get rid of their places. And Rawls can talk as long as he wants. That will not happen, in a certain sense. So in the abstract world of new possibilities, a scheme of cooperation may exist, or rather a corresponding plan can be described and may even get our verbal approval in principle, even if we still do not have any idea yet how to realize the plan. And that is the problem. That's a deep problem of societal change. We might say that we might support a scheme of social cooperation in principle, but we do not see any path from today to there which we could accept also. And therefore, it does not help at all, this is set against Frankfurt people, that in a free and dialogical discussion, we could agree to a scheme of the society in principle if we do not tell us, if we do not agree how in concrete the division of labor and how in concrete place the development from today to then, and from today's institution to the future institution will take place, such that we can agree to the development and the evolution as well. So to say that we would support age in principle often does not mean yet that we support any of the known version for a concrete division of labor and merits. If in the concrete division of labor we specify which person has to do what, and this holds for the final goal as well as for the steps to it. And the real problem is that it's difficult to find a fair distribution and without a group of people who have history. So only in the happy case in which all participants not only verbally accept a concrete distribution of labor and merits in an actual league group, there is no problem left. Here, we all want to achieve the common end, and here each of us wants to do his share, and hopefully does it. These non-problematic forms of free action, they have that form, each of us wants to do it, each of us accepts the division of labor, and in the end, they do it. That is the Lewis type of case. But In the normal cases, the Lewis type of case doesn't exist because we still have to sit or to rely on the trust that the other people will do their task. And therefore, the possibility of free riders is always built in. And so you can always morally abuse the situation. So in a certain sense, my whole analysis wants to say we have to reduce we intentions to each of the distributive cases, but we have to do that in taking the problems of the division of labor in principle and in concrete into account. And then the whole mystification of the we disappears. That's how I see things. So in a certain sense, we wanted to get the distributive case as the group case, but we don't get it so easily as well, assert things, but also data things. Because we need commitment in free cooperation. The crucial problem in it is that the commitment and the trust that I take the commitment freely and you and he and whoever is fulfilled. So, and because taking part in joint action is free action, and free action means that in any moment a person can defect and think, well, for me it's better not to do it. Therefore, these joint actions are always in danger. And so we rely on trust and commitment. So free cooperation gets uncertain. Because even if verbally everybody says in principle I'm in favor of it, and they will never lie to you about that, nevertheless they don't do it. So in principle everybody possibly wants to pay his share for public transportation, and nevertheless we have free rights, and so on. Of course we have the same for verbally everybody says that everybody wants to care for the commons and for the common meadow, but nobody in the end cares for it. So they say it, but they don't do it. In precisely such cases, we talk now from the side about moral commitment or moral duty. It is this autonomy which Kant was addressing in his analysis. So it's our own acceptance of joint action in principle which binds us. It's not my will which binds me, it's our will which binds me. And Kant is not too precise here. In fact, he is in a deploring way unprecise. Obviously, we use the word morality for a whole family of cases. My proposal would be that morality and normativity, by the way, the only possibility of any normativity in this world stems from free cooperation. This is to be said against or to or random, because sometimes random is read or can be read as if normativity would be independent of free cooperation. But I think there cannot be any moral or any normativity independent of free cooperation. Therefore, there is some lacuna, at least in my understanding, of normativity in Brandon, because even the normativity of language is dependent on free cooperation. So, the following principle now resembles Kant's categorical imperative. If I can want that a possible maxim, which I read as a possible form of joint action, and that's already one lacuna in Kant, because he doesn't say that the maxim is not a subjective way of what I want to do, a small h, it's a large h, it's a joint h. Be a general law, and if I practice h, that means the concretization of h in and for itself, and if that defines a meshed plan, as Bradman says, of an already actually recognized intention, then I have to perform my corresponding moral duty H star. So our analysis shows that Kant does not account for the difference between the abstract age, the abstract form of cooperating, and the concrete division of labor, nor for the crucial difference between my recognition of H and H star and our recognition of them. And therefore, he can criticize him and say, if you think that these maxims, if you think that it's possible that everybody follows these maxims, this doesn't make the following of these maxims good already, because you have to know if the others want it also. And this cannot be judged by you. And therefore, Hegel is totally right to attack Kant's subjectivism, because Kant thinks, if I, and Hegel ridicules it, if I can want that there are no property laws, but everything is common, I can want that. No problem with that. Therefore, I can steal books in the bookstore, because I can want that everybody steals books in the bookstore. And therefore, because I can want to get rid of the property law, Kant, in Hegel's ironical description, Kant cannot tell us that stealing is bad, because he can want that. Of course, Kant didn't mean it that way. That doesn't help him, because he expressed it that way. And insofar it's clear that in order to be morally obligatory, my ideas, what could be a good maxim, and I could universalize it, are not enough. I really have to know if you really accept it, and you agree. So it must be not only in principle a good idea, it must be a concrete good idea. And that's exactly the difference between what Hegel talks about Sittlichkeit, that means the ethical life and its development, and Kant doesn't talk about that issue at all. And insofar, I think Hegel is totally right to criticize him. Kant's talk of a general law is much too unclear to fit to these relevant cases. However, in some interesting types of cases, and that was the reason why Kant was misled, Kant's principle is a sufficient criterion for distinguishing between morally coherent and incoherent schemes of action, and that is exactly the case of the prisoner's dilemma. Because Kant can say acting like Liebes or acting like a defector in the prisoner's dilemma is already morally wrong. It's morally wrong because we know from the outset that cooperation is better than defection. And we don't even have to talk about that. So amazingly, Kant's approach, we have to be able to will that our scheme of action can be universalized, rules out the idea that I'm a defector and hope that you don't defect, because then I gain even more than if both defect. So that is incoherent. So therefore the prisoner's dilemma shows that Kant's maxim, even if it's only subjective, rules out this case. This at least is the advantage of Kant's analysis, but it is by far not good enough. So, in other words, the fact that Kant's ethics rules out some wrong actions cannot be turned into a method of deciding if a form of action, a maxim, is a good one or not. That would be the positive case. And I think this is quite interesting because it shows the very limitation of Kant's analysis, by the way, and it's not even good enough to bring to the fore the wheel of ignorance of Rawls, because when Rawls gives credit to Kant, he doesn't realize that his debate of fairness of joint actions is structurally already different from Kant's approach. Because Kant has only an approach from a subjective perspective to a form of action. And he doesn't talk about the development of institutions or things I was talking about. Nevertheless, Kant's transcendental I must be reconstructed as a we. And now you see that statement, the we is an I, and the I is a we, and the we is an I, in Hegel answers already to Kant's transcendental I in the critique of pure judgment. And it must be reconstructed as a we, and therefore I read this gnomic oracle as not only as the starting point of what's going on in the phenomenology of spirit, but at the same time an answer to Kant's transcendental. And for Hegel it's clear that we have to go into much more details of the analysis of that we than Kant did. So I have to leave out some things one point I would like to say that Kant's formulation is appropriate for all cases when I'm in a position to know in a sense immediately that I, as an arbitrary representative of us, would acknowledge the action H and H, that means H star, that means the general principal action of joint action and the particular division of labor as a good form of cooperative practice as it is already installed. Then I'm obliged to act according to it. But this H star is something non-trivial because it's already established. It's not only in thought. And that's the big difference between Kant and Hegel. It must be already in practice. And then, of course, I'm obliged to follow. The moral principle helps us thus to understand the contrast between moral reason and mere rationality, or even moral rationality. Moral rationality is following given forms, and moral reason is knowing how to evaluate it wholesome. So, in principle. So, therefore, moral reason is, with moral reason, we are able to criticize established institutions. And insofar, it goes beyond moral rationality, which just is the consequence of the already established division of labor and merit. But the structure is intricate. We do not and cannot jointly agree to any other scheme of joint action than cooperation. This is what I said already, because cooperation is better than non-cooperation. At least from the joint perspective. And therefore, we do not even have to ask, for example, in the case of a prisoner's dilemma, if the others want to cooperate, because it's self-understood that this is better. Therefore, this is the reason why in the prisoner's dilemma, if the two suspects promise each other not to defect, that promise won't help. They are at the same situation as if they didn't promise, because silently they have promised. And this is at least part of the analysis of Kant. We know that already, we don't have to talk about it. So each of us knows that quite well, already children. And therefore, our duty or our duties are all grounded in the fact that we know what we would accept as what we only would accept as cooperative schemes. And if there are no alternatives, then we have to do it. But Kant presumes that there is no alternative, and therefore, very often, we have a variety of the alternatives, and the variety of the alternatives of division of labor, and this can be settled only by historical development. By the way, the real problem here arises from the mixture between conventional solution to problems, the Lewis type, and free cooperation, because many problems are solved conventionally by the history of development of institutions, and Kant is totally overlooking that fact, and he's talking as if we always start anew in these free cooperations, and if they are not built in conventional solutions, partial solutions of cooperative problems, and just because our institutional facts are mixtures of free cooperative, that means morally demanding cooperative forms, and conventional forms of corporations. Therefore, Kant is just overlooking the historical dimension of these solutions of the problems. So, threats of sanctions by state power of course help. There's nothing wrong with that. David Lewis is right that by the change of the matrix of the benefits, we can bring people to cooperate, and Hegel has a meta-norm saying if it's possible to reduce the danger and insecurity of trust and free corporations by installing a state regime with threat of sanctions, and then people, by their own interest, do the right thing, that is even better than if you did it as a free corporation. An interesting case, there's a debate, was a debate with famous but bad philosopher Sloterdijk in Germany, where Sloterdijk thinks that having a practice of giving freely to the poor would be much better than these taxes who are forced, because people are morally better if they do that freely. He doesn't see that, of course, taxes and social security is much better than the old praxis of the church to help the poor, just if the rich man is happy to do so. So in a certain sense, this is just nonsense what Sloterdijk says. So in a certain sense, it's true. If David Lewis would say, if you solve a problem of coordinating and cooperating by installing state-forced, sanction-based change of the problem, that is the morally better way. I totally would agree with that. But David Lewis doesn't say anything like that. That is now the end, and more or less it's at the same time a kind of advertising Bob Brandon's new book, A Spirit of Trust, because I really envy his title. A Spirit of Trust says that the crucial problem of the moral law and free cooperation is the problem of trust. It is concerned with the hope that the other participants of our weak group will do their duty too, because only then I will benefit of the joint cooperation, because it won't take place if everybody else defects. This trust and hope is necessary since we are actually interested in the success of our free cooperation. But in distinction to Kant, Hegel had acknowledged this clearly. Trust and hope are constitutive for the success of cooperation. If I do not trust that the others shall cooperate, I will most probably also not do what I'm supposed to do according to the implicitly known best form of cooperation. So the problem of trust shows that moral duty is not unconditioned, but it is not conditioned on the hoped gains. It's conditioned on if I can trust in my weak group, and that's another condition, because it would be too much if Kant would force us to trust immediately without even asking if the other have to be trusted. But as a default case, they have to be trusted. So it's a complicated situation. The default case is I have to trust everybody. But if I know that these other people cannot be trusted, I'm not forced to go. That is the complicated situation. So that is the end. And in my opinion, Hegel's thinking leads to a critique of fundamentalist liberalism, and therefore he is criticizing this fundamentalist liberalism, which in a certain sense is methodological individualism. But Hegel is conservative in his point of view, because political revolutions or evolutions. Hegel is not for revolution, he is for evolution or developments, must follow the principle of a constructive vote of distrust. Only the establishment of a new government or a new division of labor should be supported if it's better than the old. So, in the government, of course, this is a principle that you need a positive vote for a new government and not only a negative vote for the old. And that is the principal force of a conservative evolution. And at the same time, I think that he sees that civil unrest or even civil war cannot be avoided if I do not have at least a minimum situation of fairness in the society. And therefore, he is ridiculing liberalism because he sees that Manchester liberalism is in effect no liberalism, but it sits on the force of war or force of brute force. So Hegel, the liberal state as a safeguard of property rights must be defended. In that case, he's a liberal. We need the central power of the state if we want to defend personal freedom and autonomy, and this is a Hobbesian part of his analysis. However, this also entails for Hegel the duty to provide social security for those who benefit least from a liberal property regime enforced by the state. So Manchester liberalism is inconsistent insofar as it has no moral argument against revolutionary civil war and just relies on brute force. And that was Hegel's argument against the British tradition in the 20s and how I read it. So it was not so much against, he's not at all against property rights, but he's against abuse of property rights. That was exactly how he saw in the constitutions. By the way, by the end of the 20s, in the change of the Bill of Rights in the UK, in the Great Britain, they made some important changes. So the criticism before was more radical. So that was it. Thank you very much.
So we have more or less 20 minutes for discussion. Any questions, comments?
So, the criticism of Brandon, I'm not sure I understand. So you said that normativity presupposes free cooperation.
Yes.
I would say that normativity is in a sense is a very specific form of cooperation, and so perhaps we don't have any problem. I don't know, but you said that. In Bob's case, it sometimes seems that he sees normativity as independent of cooperation. I wonder what do you mean by this?
You yourself said right now, as if you could talk about normativity and norms as if they were not already part in the tasks of the speaker and hearer. But these tasks of the speaker and hearer are not just only conventionally prefixed. They are conventionally prefixed by means and forms of cooperative techniques. So, when I do not stick to certain rules of default inferences, there are two possibilities. The first possibility is that you don't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah? And if you, so I should talk in a way that you can understand it, and that's of course a part of a cooperation.
Yes.
And all the linguistic rules which Brandon deals with wholesale as normative are already in most cases at least, technical prefixed rules which help us to cooperate. But if we don't stick to them, and if you give signs, for example, that we don't want to stick to them, for example, in ironical talk or in metaphorical talk, then we are free to use them or not. So the difference between the cooperative norms which force us to keep these rules is only limited by the cooperative success of our linguistic cooperations, and therefore the rules as such do not force us. The rules force us only as technical helps for the dialogical cooperation. Why is that so important? Because when you look at the difference between the logic of sentences and the logic of assertions, which for me is important as an interpretation of Hegel, because Hegel thinks that the formal logic of sentences is only a technique for improving the dialogical understanding of speech acts. And here, there is much more freedom in, we are not forced to use these rules. If the situation is good enough, we can do whatever we want, we will understand. Therefore, a logic of dialectics just says the cooperative success in the speech act situation depends highly on the situation and context, and uses these what Brandon calls norms, which are general, only as tools. And this is the difference. Because in his presentation, it sounds as if these norms were normatively forcing us. And this is not how I see things, because we still have a big distinction between what is a default norm for sentences and what is a cooperative principle of understanding dialogues.
So, insofar as I understand you, which I'm not completely sure, you sound like Davidson.
Well, the big difference is that Davidson has a logical understanding sentences, which is fairly old-fashioned, because he has the idea of the Quinian and Fregean sentences in mind, and he doesn't really address the difference between speech acts and sentences.
No, I meant his idea that rules are important also because we can violate them, and by violating them we can do something meaningful and so.
Absolutely, because Davidson, in that case, of course, because Davidson, just like many others, like for example, Lakoff and Max Black and all these people who see the importance of understanding metaphors. So it's no wonder I was telling the people in the seminar, it's no wonder why generative semantics turn to metaphors, as in Lakoff. Because generative semantics with the priority of understanding just moves away from these more or less syntactically bound logic to the logic of speech acts. And the interesting thing is they did it in a different way than the much more logic-bound analysis in Austin and Searle. Because Searle still wants to articulate the rules for speech acts in a syntactically canonized form of sentences. Whereas these people like Lakoff and Max Black see that even if we have on the sentence or the expression level, if we would have a non-monotonic reasoning, the non-monotonicity of reasoning and the selecting of default inferences in dialogues have another logic and you should separate them. And the problem here I see in Brandon is, for example, that he wants to do non-monotonic logic on the level of sentences and not on the level of assertions. And therefore, for me, this distinction is absolutely crucial. Yeah.
I have a follow-up. I would say that the position more reminds Grice than Davidson.
This is right, but the big difference is Grice has that wrong idea of the meaning of utterer's meaning. That means of the intention of the utterer. And therefore he plays the game of finding out what is in your brain. And this is just the misunderstanding. What we have to understand are utterance types and not utterer's meaning. And therefore, Grice, like Bradman, they mystify my mind-reading capacities. I do never mind-reading. I just look for the utterance type. That means the cooperation type we are in. And I have to figure out that. And that is objective. It doesn't have anything to do with you because you are only the player if you make an utterance. So he shouldn't talk about utterer's meaning, but utterance meaning, and then he should talk about utterance types and talk about the cooperation principles in understanding the utterances.
Yeah.
And then I would totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. So you agree with the, more or less when you talk about norms, when you're talking about norms, you are talking about something like Grice and Maxims, though you don't like the background.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. He's just putting that on the wrong place.
Yeah.
But else that's a very important, and therefore I always say this is part of a standard teaching of philosophy of language, which we should by no means forget. But we should put it in the right place.
Are there any questions?
I do not understand the connection between free cooperation and rules. Rules. For example, rules can be imposed by some government with dictatorship. And so it's kind of imposed on the society and people have to follow it, but people do it cooperatively. I didn't get why you said that there is close connection.
Yeah, well, in fact, I didn't analyze and focus at all on the difference between different ways of installing or manifesting or instantiating possible conventional solution for coordinative problems or cooperative problems. Free cooperation is the title for the situation where we still have to find out freely how to cooperate. So, for example, it's the case where we don't have already sanctions and rules and conventions in the background. So the term is just for this free way. We deal all day without caring for laws. And what I just said is that in many cases where there is no danger of trust or the costs are not high, that's no problem. And in that case, we shouldn't need and we shouldn't over-regulate our life, and that is what Habermas says against colonization of the life world. We shouldn't overdo that. But when it comes to the solution of real coordination problems, where we are much better off, our wealth and well-being, but also our possibilities of acting freely if we install some rules, then from my very abstract description, it would be just the same if the state is a well-meaning patriarchal tyrant, or if it's an elected democratic government, with respect to the solution, but not, of course, with respect to our acceptance of the rules. That's another question. So I totally agree with these differentiations, because on the level of law giving, that we have an interesting tradition that in 2,400 years after Plato, most people focused on the content of the laws and norms, and therefore abstracted from the quality of the ruler. They didn't care if it's a Caesar or a king, but only evaluated the goodness or badness of the laws. But now, the last 200 years, we focus on the procedures and who is the lawgiver. Just as the Greek cities before Plato did. But because the democracy before Plato collapsed, and there are good reasons why, because it was a naive scheme, from that onwards, people focused on the good law and not on the good rulers. And therefore, the interest of the whole debate was much more focusing on the results and not on the way the laws are given. But since the 18th century, this has changed. And it's very interesting to see that this has changed. So your question is absolutely interesting, in my opinion, because we are today more interested in the legality or how you call it, constitutionality of the way the law is given than on the quality of the laws. Whereas people in the Middle Ages were more focusing on the quality of the laws and didn't care so much who was doing it. And that is a really interesting shift in focus. My opinion, of course, is that both aspects are fairly independent. That means the cost of democratic culture, there are costs on the quality, there might be costs on the quality of the laws. Even such a grand man, and at the same time problematic man as Russell, has these ideas when he says that lieber rot als tot, I prefer to be red than dead. Whereas more radical liberalists would say, no, I prefer to be dead than red. In the 50s, you know. So freedom of self-rule is for most of us, in the meantime, a higher good than the quality of the laws, which is interesting in my opinion. But on the other hand, we have these, in a certain sense, it helps us to understand the right wings and the left wings. That means the populist people, they always talk about the quality of the laws, but they do not talk about the quality of the lawgiver. And therefore they are so dangerous, because people are convinced about them and do not realize how stupid that is, because that's really going back into the Middle Ages anyway. But yeah, the point is, everybody thinking about democracy knows that democracy has some costs because they have to bargain some more or less good or bad compromises. And if you would have a gifted tyrant, he could possibly give better laws. But as we also know, the costs of these tyrants are very high, because who knows if they are really good. That means we have good reason to say that the best laws are better laws than our democracies are able to give, should not convince us to get rid of the Constitution. So I totally agree with you, but that is a kind of special continuation which looks to the lawgiver and not to the systematic role they have. I have only a placeholder for you.
I would like to allow one more question. We have 2-3 minutes. If there is no, I will use my
Yeah.
power and I will ask.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the talk, you criticized the set or extensional reading of we, and you proposed, let's say, whoever reading of we. I'm not sure, this is a clarificatory question. I'm not sure in which context this should apply. Because I can imagine even the case of joint action in which whoever reading is not reachable, is not inferable. For example, you can say that we graduated in 1999, we as a group graduated, but you cannot say that whoever graduated in 1999 graduated in 1999. This is not the sentence. There are contexts, like say, if we go on hike, if you plan a hike, and we say that we will be at the hub at 2 p.m., this allows the whoever reading. Whoever takes place in a hike will be at the hub at 2 p.m. So, even though I agree with you that there are some contexts in which in which the whoever reading is allowed, this is not a general scheme or general interpretation of we.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but my point was only we have to make a distinction between distributive and non-distributive, that means joint, and we have to make a distinction between open and closed. In the closed case, it's clear who is belong to the we group, and it's limited, and it's fixed. In the open case, we can make more distinctions, but the open case is open for who can be so open as whoever wants to join.
Yeah.
Or it can be limited to a group which is eligible for joining.
Yeah.
So of course we can make this distinction of the open we. But my only proposal was that we make these distinctions and then look if we are in the open case or in the closed case and how the open case is to be read. Because if some of the we's in the books written by an author, some of these we's are pluralism staticus, some of these we's are in a certain sense paternalistic, saying, well, we have proven that, and if you do not see it, then you are excluded. And some are just, and you can see that in the context, some are just polite. You can join, and if you don't, I don't care. And I just wanted to make clear that we have a very fine ear for the differences, and we do not realize that these differences are in place, and therefore you have people who are shooting too fast and saying, well, that man is abusing the we, and not seeing that it's their fault that he's not abusing it. But sometimes, for example, in your approach, once I replaced the we with an I, if you remember, in your application, in your book, because at sometimes the polite man takes the responsibility and doesn't say it, you know. And that's exactly where I would say we have a very nice and very sharp ear to these distinctions. I totally agree with you. Okay, thank you very much.
So thank you for the talk.